All right, check 1, 2, testing 1, 2, there we go. We want to welcome everybody here and welcome any folks who might be joining us online. We're live streaming this as well to Facebook and YouTube just as we do the normal services, so just be aware of that. Let me get out of this. There we go. Okay. We want to thank you for joining us for this third and final town hall meeting before our vote on February the 19th. We took our straw poll. Many of you, I'm sure, participated in our straw poll at the end of our annual charge conference meeting back in December. And as a result of those that information that was gathered, we gleaned that there were a couple of things that are particularly on the hearts and minds of the members of our congregation as we go into this decision. And so we wanted just to take some time to address some of those issues specifically. And then we've got some layers of bureaucracy to deal with to make sure that everybody understands sort of what to expect on the 19th, because there are going to be a couple of quirks that we want to make sure everybody's aware of and knows about. And to that end, this week there are going to be a series of letters for me. I don't know if I liken myself to the Apostle Paul, but maybe the technocrat Joel. That would work probably. Anyway, I put together a series of letters that we're going to send out, one a day. We're also before COVID hit my family, I was trying to do videos as well. We'll see if those actually happen, but at the very least there will be written letters describing some of the things around what to expect as we make our way toward the 19th. A couple of things I want to emphasize before we begin. First of all, come on Wednesday, to the Wonderful Wednesday if you can. Even if you don't come for the meal proper, you can come 7 o'clock, join us. We're going to gather around tables. This is really one of those God moments as we gathered for the worship committee. I just so appreciate the wisdom and the care of that committee for bringing the question. There was a question raised, how can we sort of saturate this tense and anxiety-causing season in the life of our church? How can we surround that with prayer and ground us in worship, which is, of course, what the worship committee does. And we got to talking about it and sort of came up with an idea and really feel like the Lord's hand is in it. So would really love to have as many people there as possible on Wednesday. We're going to honestly just sit around and we're going to hear some word, we're going to say some prayer, and we're going to share in some testimony about the impact that this church has had on your life. So come and be thinking about that in the meantime. How has this church impacted your life for the better? Would encourage that. Now, so there's that. Then the second thing, don't forget that the all-church meeting is going to be after worship and fellowship time on the 19th. We're going to get into some of the details about a lot of the questions we've been fielding about people maybe not being able to be here. How can you participate? We've got you covered, so I'll be covering that in a little bit. But we're going to begin, first of all, with some prayer. I think that seems like a great place to start, right? So why don't we join in some prayer? Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks and praise for the day, for our chance to gather as your body and to grow in our knowledge and understanding of the issues before us. Lord, we pray that as we seek your will, that your Holy Spirit would be mighty upon us, that you would fill our hearts with conviction and direction, that you would order our steps and light our path, O God. Reveal to us how we can best serve and love you in this season, but also how we can serve and love each other. Lord, we thank you for this church and for all she has done to build your kingdom and all she will continue to do. To you and Christ and the Holy Spirit be the glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so we're going to start off, not a huge surprise, but as we dove into the finer details of our straw poll, you might remember if you took the straw poll that one of the questions was what factors are important to you as we make this decision, and there were probably a half dozen or maybe 8 or 10 options there, and a place you could put in others if you want. There were a lot of people, regardless of how they expressed their vote on those straw polls, there were a lot of people who expressed concerns about finances and the financial impact of the possibility of our disaffiliating. So I wanted to, and a lot of this will be addressed in the letters that we're going to come out this week too, so I'm leaning upon a lot of the same stuff. So as you read the letters this week, or encounter that material as it comes out, just know that there'll be some overlap there, but it'll be a great place for you to sort of look back to get all this information again if you're not jotting down notes quickly enough. But to begin, I want us to first talk about the financial costs. What does that look like? One of the things that's really important for us to understand is that no matter what we decide on February 19th, that decision will have financial costs to the church. It'll have costs of all kinds, but in particular we're talking about financial costs. There will be costs to the church whether we disaffiliate or not. So it's important for us to understand that there is financial impact on both sides of that boat, if that makes sense, okay? So I'm going to hope to try to unpack some of this for you. The financial cost of staying in the UMC will result in the eventual likelihood that we will lose members, that people who have been a part of this fold, if we don't disaffiliate, would walk away and find a church that better matches their, or a denomination that better matches their values. So that's a cost. And as they leave, they will likely take their giving with them. Now the same can be said if we disaffiliate. There will be people who feel that they need to remain and desire to remain in the UMC, and that would mean that they would feel perhaps that they would have to leave. There are also lots of people who could live with the church deciding something other than their preference. That was also an expressed desire. So it wasn't just that, well, if I vote against disaffiliation and the church disaffiliates, that I'm out of here. And it's not universally that if the church doesn't disaffiliate, I'm gone. But it is a fact. One of the most solid and indisputable truths that we mined from the straw poll is that there is no way of making everybody happy. So however the vote comes down, however it's done, there will be costs on both sides. It's important to kind of know those costs. In my letter about the details of that, we'll go into more detail about it. But to give you some idea, we had 60% of those respondents to the straw poll express a strong desire to disaffiliate, a clear desire to disaffiliate. We had about 18% of those who responded express a clear desire to remain in the United Methodist Church. And then there was 22% that fell into one of two related categories, and that was undecided or needs more information, which is really two ways of saying kind of the same thing, right? So there's this block in the middle that doesn't know, isn't sure, and isn't quite sure they know how to move forward, or they need more information to make that decision. So part of today's goal is to help you, give you some more information to help you if you're in that category. We don't need to raise hands. We're not going to name names. We don't even know your names. So, well, I know your names, but I don't know how you voted, and that's fine. The important thing is we want to try and equip people with as much information as possible. So the more obvious cost at stake in this process is, should the church decide to disaffiliate, that will come with some financial penalties that we would have to pay to the annual conference. And that's related to the trust clause, right? All of our property and asset is held here at the Brighton United Methodist Church, is held in trust by the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church. And the Mountain Sky Conference has the sort of final word over what happens to our building. Now that was designed that way from the very beginning. It was actually implemented by John Wesley in the earliest forms of the discipline for the purpose of binding us together, to make it so that a congregation, a class meeting, a society couldn't just up and leave, change the name on the front, and declare themselves something different. That was a strong desire of Wesley, and it's carried through legally. We're not the only denomination that has something like the trust clause. Every other denomination that has gone through this controversy has had to deal with that in some form or fashion. There's something that binds a denomination together, and historically that has been that the larger church entity, in this case the annual conference, holds all of our assets. Now we own it, and the money in our bank account is used for the ministries that we direct here in the church, but it is held in trust by the conference, so we can't just decide we're something different and move out. So because of that, there are some costs. And so let's dig into some of those costs. The cost total is, as you can see here, $113,993. That is the dollar amount that was quoted to us just this past week. As a part of the process, we had to apply for entry into the process. Back in January, Administrative Council looked at the straw poll, decided there was enough interest behind exploring this possibility that we started the process. I want to be clear that at any point in this process, even after the vote on the 19th, we can still change our mind, up until the point that we pay our final bill and they release our trust. So nothing's finalized yet. And even after the 19th, you'll see in a minute that there could be an opportunity for us to reconsider. But just know that we're not finalizing any decision until we pay the bill and move out, if that's what we choose to do. But this would be the cost. The discipline, as changed in 2019, paragraph 2553, for those of you nerds who are interested. I'm the only nerd who's interested, I know, but that's okay if you're interested. That paragraph outlines certain minimum mandatory costs to disaffiliating, and they have some logic behind them, so I want us to understand them just briefly. First of all, there is something called the unfunded pension liability. That's a fancy way of saying we share the risk of part of our pension that is not funded. We all live in the real world, and we all know that back in the dinosaur era, when there were a lot of pensions out there, I know there's like municipal pensions for cops and firefighters and for pastors. That's about all you find pensions anymore. But a pension is a promise to the worker, in this case the clergy, to help them in retirement, right? And the church pays some, I pay some, we contribute to that. But the dollar amounts that I and the church contribute to that are not enough to cover what I'm promised if I were to live as long as they expect. Actuary tables and all that stuff, that's way above my head. But if they had to pay every cent they owed to every pastor for as long as they could conceivably have to pay that, there would be a gap, right, between what's in the bank, or literally what's invested in the market, and what is actually owed. So that unfunded pension liability, the risk of that coming due is greater or smaller depending on circumstances. The market has a lot to do about that, how well the market's doing. The interest rates, honestly, also have a lot to do with that too. And but there is some portion that's unfunded. And so the discipline recognizes that while we are united in an annual conference, every church in the annual conference collectively shares the risk of that unfunded portion of the pension fund. And so if that bill ever came due, the conference could apportion more to each church to cover that, so that the pastors wouldn't be shorted what they had been promised. Okay? Whether they would ever need to do that is a huge question. We don't know. But the possibility exists. And so because that possibility exists, if a church were to leave the United Methodist Church, it technically comes out from underneath that liability. Does that make sense? So if we were to leave, we would no longer be a piece of that puzzle that could be tapped to help fund that unfunded portion if it was needed, right? And so because of that, the General Conference in its wisdom said we need to have the denomination decide what the actual amount is, and the annual conference can decide how much of that is the burden of a church that's going to leave. The way our conference has chosen to calculate that burden is to take the total amount paid to every pastor in our conference and compare that to what you pay your pastor over the last 3 years. So that'd be what you paid me. And so when they do that math, it comes out to some ridiculous number. I have it here. Hold on. Too many papers. 0.3648843%. So roughly little more than 1/3 of 1% of all the salary paid to all the pastors you paid to me to be your pastor over the last 3 years. Now, when you take that number and you put it to the number that they get from the denomination, it comes out to $36,689. You don't need to write that down. It's in my letter that's coming out this week. But $36,000 essentially is our church's portion of that. I will have you know that when we first got that number, way back in May when I inquired, the market was more volatile and interest rates were significantly lower. Strangely enough, although the market is just as wild as ever, the interest rates have climbed significantly, as you probably know, and those interest rates have had a significant positive impact on the liability because they can get a greater yield from those. Correct me, financial nerds, if I'm butchering this, but the pension fund can get more because the interest rates are higher. So our liability is smaller. So this is less than half what we were originally quoted. I was expecting, when that email came in on Monday, I was expecting our dollar figure to be in the $250,000 range. So the fact that it's $113 instead of $250, I considered a big deal. So just know that markets and interest rates have worked in our favor should we decide to do this, and so that's $36,000. There's another promise to our retirees that is unique to our annual conference, at least, and that is that they have promised a Medicare supplement subsidy for all retired pastors and their spouses. And to fund that, they are short an apportioned amount, $39,823. So almost $40,000 for the retiree health care benefit, and about $36,600 for the unfunded pension liability. You add to that our apportionments. Now, for those of you who play the Methodist game long enough, you know we pay a part of our income to the annual conference to fund the wider mission of the church. We call that wider mission giving or apportionments, etc. Basically, it comes from a formula. We report our income to the conference. They calculate 13% of that, and then they bill us for that 13%. And some churches pay it, and some churches don't. We have paid it in full every year for the last 13 years and have a long history of paying it before that. So we have stayed up on our apportionments, but the discipline requires that we pay an additional year's worth of apportionments as well as catching up in the current year. We're caught up in the current year, so we have to pay one additional year, which comes to about $35,000. So you add all that together, and you get $113,993. Don't check my math. It's not my math, it's their math. So that's the total amount. That is the minimum. Now, as I said, that's the minimum. The thing about the discipline is they set the minimum, but they also leave discretion in the hands of the annual conference and their trustees, which means there is no maximum. In the case of our annual conference, they have chosen to give us the minimum, then have the vote, and then use the vote totals to decide whether they want to ask for more. Now that might seem like a problem, right? We won't know exactly how much we'll have to pay or if we'll have to pay more than this until after we vote. That's why I said that we can change our minds. If they come back and they say we need another $50,000 or $500,000, then we could say, no, that'll crush us. We can't do that. And we can change our minds and do something else. But for the time being, we take our vote, and then they look at the vote totals. Now, the reason for that is because there may be, as I point out in my letter, there could be, say, 100 members vote on the 19th, and we get to that 67, the 2/3 threshold. We'll talk about all of these details in a minute too, but we get to that 67 vote magic number that authorizes us to continue on in the process of disaffiliation. We meet that burden. There still leaves 33 members who showed up and were interested enough to make their vote and who would like to stay. And those 33 members have contributed to the ministries of this church every bit as much as the 67. And so to the annual conference, they look at that and say, perhaps that 33, if they all wanted to come together, if they all decided that because the church has voted to leave, they'll have to leave the congregation, that perhaps there would be an opportunity to plant a church. And so they evaluate whether planting a church is viable here, and if so, would these people want to come along with them to do that, to be that seed for a church plant? And if there is sufficient interest, they may request more from us to help fund a seed to plant that church, if that makes sense, okay? I've heard it on podcasts likened to divorce. If you've ever been through divorce, this is very much what it's like, right? We're going to divide the stuff. We're going to divide the assets. We're going to figure out what to do. It's a lot like that. With the annual conference as kind of the family court judge, right? So pardon the analogy there, but it's a lot like that, and it's unfortunate. But that's the case. Now, if we get a relatively overwhelming vote for disaffiliation, then the conference will sort of back off and say, okay, there's not a viable core that we could conceivably begin a new church with. Or the place in which this church that's disaffiliating sits is not suitable for two Methodist presence, even if they're unique and distinct. So a lot of that kind of goes into it. I will tell you that of the, I think there's been about a dozen, maybe 16 churches that have disaffiliated so far prior to this year. Of those churches, the trustees have not requested anything above the minimum from any of them. That being said, all of them are from smaller rural communities, and none of them have had full-time pastors. So we're talking smaller churches served by part-time pastors at best that have chosen to disaffiliate thus far. This is really the first year of any churches with full-time pastors in more suburban or urban settings that might consider this. We did find out over the past week that 34 churches in the annual conferences are considering disaffiliation this year, which is more than the conference thought there would be, more than I thought there would be, frankly. But we are not alone in discerning this, going through this process. So, yeah, that's just the Mountain Sky Conference. Yeah, there have been hundreds of churches that have already left. There have been hundreds more that have sought to leave but have been barred by their annual conference in various ways. But to their credit, our annual conference doesn't seem interested in barring us, but they're also not, packing our bags and sending us off with a cheery salute. They're doing their due diligence just as we would expect, and just as we would expect of ourselves. So, that's the basic cost. We don't know, like I said, what that dollar amount might be. If they come back and say, hey, we want more, we don't really have any guidance because they haven't really sought to do that yet. So we don't have anything to kind of go on. But right now, the only thing we can control in that process is take our vote, and if we are of relatively uniform thought about it in our voting, then it's less likely that they would come after more. We're also positioned in a place where there are Methodist churches that are not far from us. So if there were people who felt like a vote going contrary to their preference, there are other United Methodist churches that are quite close. We have sheep swapped with the Fort Lupton United Methodist Church for years. You can always tell when there's dysfunction at one church or the other because members start showing up at the other. So that's not uncommon. And I know for a fact that the Fort Lupton Church is not considering disaffiliation, so they will remain in the UMC. There's also Good Shepherd in Thornton and a couple of others, and so we will, there are options that are close by. Whether they look at Brighton and say this is a place we'd like to plant a church, we don't know. So just know that that's the X factor we don't know, and we won't know until after the vote. I believe, I don't know this for fact, but I believe the conference is sort of loosely committing to getting back to us within a week of our vote with any additional costs, so we would be able to evaluate that quickly. So how would we cover that cost? That's another big question, right? So what is the cost? Let's count it. We talked about the $35,000 per year in apportionments in relationship to that number, that $113,000. But one of the other things to keep in mind is that right now, as a member congregation of the Mountain Sky Conference in the UMC, we currently pay a rate of 13% in our apportionments to the annual conference. So for us, as I mentioned, that's roughly $35,000 a year, split up over 12 months. The Global Methodist Church, that's the GMC, not the truck, the Global Methodist Church, the New Methodist denomination, they are estimating their initial apportionments at 2.5%. So if you use that figure to estimate our apportionment in perhaps a GMC, if we choose to go that way, that would be $6,730. You'll notice that that's significantly less than $35,000, and it amounts to a difference of about $2,300 a month. Doesn't add up? Did I do my math wrong? All right, math guys, help me out, guys and gals. What's that? 2,300, yes. Yeah, per month. 2,300 per month. Yeah. So our month. No, per year. Yeah. So I'm confusing. We're going to do some math. See, this is why you have to have smart people correcting us. Okay. For a difference of all right, good. I did the math right. Whew. 55 off. Well, I rounded. I rounded for the sake of argument. The 35,000 a year is a round too, by the way. They're not exact numbers. That's why you have a little about sign. Okay, anyway. All right, good. I'm glad I wasn't too far off. I was really tired when I did this, but hopefully I got that right. So anyway, so a difference of $2,300 a month. So imagine if you had $2,300 more in your account every month than you did before. And we talk about a current mortgage. Our current mortgage balance is around $116,000. If we were to wrap in that $116,000, that's down from when we financed that through the foundation. Our balance started off at over $250,000. So as that has come down, our payment hasn't come down. Has your house payment gone down? Nope. Whatever you factor, whatever it was amortized when you got your mortgage, that's what you pay, no matter what your balance is, right? So we've been paying a rate on a $250,000 plus loan for the last 10 years, I think. I don't know how long we've had this particular loan, but we've been paying that for quite a while. That was refinanced when we sold the parsonage and paid off some of our debt at that point. So if we roll the 113 in with the 116, that's still less than the 250. And if we're approaching that with an extra $2,300 in our pocket each month, the math I haven't done specific because I'm not the mortgage people, but you can see that we would clearly have there would be a net gain essentially on that apportionments to the cost of doing a new loan. We also have not a commitment to fund our loan, but commitment to consider applications from churches that are seeking disaffiliation from the foundation, which is independent from our annual conference. And so they are willing to receive an application, and we have been a client in good standing with them for a long time. So I would not suspect we would have any issues there. So there's also some other options that have been sort of loosely bantied about. Once we were to get out of the United Methodist Church, if we so choose, we could do things like we could sell the field across the street beyond our parking lot and use those funds to pay down some of the debt, to offset some of that, and then refinance, renegotiate. All kinds of options are at our disposal. But just know that there are options. Even if we just started off clean slate, GMC with a brand new loan, paying off the denomination, everything we'd owe them, and get out, we would still likely be ahead financially from where we are today. Yes. Yeah, that would be, yeah, so if we choose to disaffiliate and we pay the fee that that is required of us by the conference, whether it's this or something larger because of factors. Once we pay that fee and it's voted on at an annual conference, we are free and clear. We set up a new entity, a new incorporation that receives all of the assets and all of the bank accounts and all of that stuff, and then we choose where to go from there. But that would be leaving with all of our property and assets. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of details. You didn't know you were coming to a sales pitch, did you? And I'm not pitching here. I'm just giving you a sense of what the cost will be. Jesus tells us to count the cost, right? So it's important that we understand what we're getting into. I understand taking on an extra $113,000 in debt is not ideal. And some of you may be thinking, I'd prefer not to have to pay them anything. Okay, I get that. But this would be the only way to leave at this point. So if the church decides it wants to leave, this is the cost. Yes, Doris. We stay. Yeah. Paying this. If we wanted to leave the building, we wouldn't have to pay anything. We could march on over to Beacon Middle School and start meeting tomorrow. Okay, so for the online folks, I'll repeat that. Doris was asking what happens to the money that's been put into retirement on my behalf and by me in the United Methodist Church. Regardless of whether I remain in the United Methodist Church, I am fully vested in my pension and will be owed that upon my retirement. So it will be what it'll be. The GMC has already contracted with Westpath, our provider, to set up their own accounts through the same pension plan that the United Methodist Church currently uses. So I wouldn't be able to pay into the same pension plan, but if we were to move into the GMC and I were to choose to follow, then we would start paying into the GMC pension plan, and I would end up with 2 smaller pensions at the end of my career, if that makes sense. And that's true for all ordained elders. Local pastors are a little different. Their retirement is less stable or guaranteed just because of their part-time status. But all full-time ordained clergy are in that boat. So, and healthcare is the same way. They offer healthcare the same as to the UMC. Basically, Westpath, formerly the General Conference. The General Board of Pension and Health Benefits, otherwise known as Westpath, they have spun off as an independent entity and are open to contracting with all Methodist denominations, not just the United Methodist Church now. So that's how they can do that so seamlessly. Great question, though. Any other questions about the finances? Hopefully I didn't muddy that too much with a lot of detail, but I wanted us to know what the cost would be in dollars and cents, but I also want to communicate that if we choose to go down that path, we have the means to cover it. That's the headline. Yeah, and it is much that is true. It is much better than we anticipated even when we began talking about this process in May. So, any other questions about the finances? Okay, on to voting procedures. I know, jumping from one fantastic subject to another, riveting, I know. But one of the things that has come up a lot is we start, as soon as you pick a date, 50 people are wondering why you picked that date, and 10 can't make that date. That's how it always goes, right? That's just how meetings are. So we picked the date. We decided we wanted to do it on a Sunday so we could surround it in prayer and worship, and we could maximize people's participation. So we chose the 19th of the couple of options that we had, and we have received some feedback from folks that had already had vacations planned or are concerned they might not make it back because of travel disruptions that are increasingly common. Lots of different factors. And so there's been a lot of questions about, can we vote absentee? Are there going to be other options to vote, or do we have to be present? So there are options to vote, even if you can't be physically present, but you have to be real time. So Zoom will be an option. You can log into a Zoom meeting that we have already set up. So we'll be getting that out this week so that it's in lots of places. So it'll be not mysterious at all. We're even going to do a practice run with the Zoom meeting as the meeting draws closer to give everybody who plans or thinks they might be on Zoom an opportunity to make sure they understand all of the features so that they can vote properly. So there will be a Zoom option. There will not be an absentee option, just so you know. So if you can't be here in person and you can't log in via Zoom, then it will not be possible for you to participate in the vote, unfortunately. But let's get on with that for just a minute, okay? To get into the weeds a little bit, this is the language from the discipline that we are required to consider. That language is Brighton United Methodist Church would 4 reasons of conscience regarding a change in the requirements and provisions of the Book of Discipline related to the practice of homosexuality or the ordination or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals as resolved by adopted by the 2019 General Conference, or the actions or inactions of its annual conference related to these issues which follow. Okay, that's a big mouthful, isn't it? Where did this come from? Why is this the language we have to vote on? They're being very strict about this. This is the language we have to vote on. This language will appear on every written ballot that will be handed out on the 19th. And this will be the formal language of the motion that will be presented at that meeting. This came from the General Conference, the special General Conference in 2019 that was set aside to consider specifically the issue of human sexuality and its relation to the church and its ministries. And at that conference, they were considering proposals by a committee that had been put together of diverse backgrounds to try and resolve the issues in our denomination. That body reaffirmed the language that has been in the discipline in one form or fashion since 1972. But before they adopted that, or before they reaffirmed that language, they turned their attention to disaffiliation. The anticipation was that regardless, they were kind of facing the same thing we are. Regardless of how the vote turned out, there were going to be people upset. And the General Conference understood that there may be churches who might wish to seek to leave the denomination as a result of the actions of General Conference in 2019. They were kind of anticipating that those actions would be to change the discipline and that there might be people who would want to leave because they didn't want it changed, or that it would not change, which it didn't, and there would be people who would want it changed. You follow me? And either way, it would produce some faction that might want to leave, but there was no process in the discipline that a church could initiate that process at all. There's only one small portion of the discipline that allows for the conference to transfer the assets of a congregation to another denomination, but that requires the majority of the cabinet and the approval of the bishop. So it's very centrally located and it's usually for property of a church that is no longer viable, is typically where it's used. So it'd be unusual to take a church that has budgets and pastors and viability and transfer them to another denomination. That would be a little different than it was designed for, but it could happen. But there's no way for the church to initiate that. This is a way that the General Conference put in to initiate that, to set up some basic guidelines for how to do that if a church wanted to. And so part of that was the language here, right? So you have the provisions in the Book of Discipline related to the practice of homosexuality or the ordination of or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals as resolved by the 2019 General Conference, or the actions or inactions of the annual conference related to the issues which follow. Yes, ma'am. Primarily because the denomination, so why was this the language chosen and this issue focused on when there are maybe several issues, maybe even more, maybe even bigger issues than this? Why was this the language? Well, the short answer to that is that the denomination, the General Conference, did not wish to create a carte blanche, any church who's mad about anything can get out. They wanted specifically to address this issue because this is the issue, the presenting issue that has divided so vehemently. And it was the purpose of the General Conference in 2019. It's also why this provision sunsets at the end of this year. So it's not an indefinite, you could do this any time from now on. It's you have until the end of 2023. And if you get to January 2024 and you're not out, there's no provision anymore. And that's because they wanted to limit it to people who would be upset by the vote at General Conference 2019, if that makes sense. So while there might be more significant issues on your mind related to the United Methodist Church and might be driving your vote, this is the language we have to deal with. So, and I would venture a guess, although I can't speak for them, I would venture a guess that the annual conference suspects that your sentiments are more common, that there are other issues as well, and that might be why they're holding so fast to this particular language. So, anyway, so that's the language we'll be voting on. Just understand that. A couple of other important things about the disciplines provision is that it takes 2/3 of members present in order to approve disaffiliation. What does that mean? It means a couple of things. First of all, it means that the bar is higher than just a majority. Right? 50% of people plus one is not going to get us there. The only way to move forward is if 67% of the votes to disaffiliate from the denomination. Anything less than that, and there's no second bite at the apple. So if we get 65% of those present on the 19th, this church is remaining in the United Methodist Church for the foreseeable future. That's what that means, okay? So 2/3 vote required. Now, this other language is members present. I don't know if you've been in a lot of Robert's Rules of Order-led meetings. If you have, I'm sorry. I have run a lot of Robert's Rules of Order meetings. And the typical convention is that you've got 3 options for voting, right? You can vote yes, you can vote no, and of course how you vote depends a lot on how the resolution or motion is phrased. Yes or no, or you can abstain. One thing people don't understand is that abstaining is actually not a vote. You can't vote abstention. Abstaining literally means choosing not to vote in Robert's Rules of Order. So you can abstain, which is your choice not to vote. Now normally, when we're calculating percentage of votes, someone who chooses not to vote is not counted in that percentage. So say we've got 110 people that show up, and 67 of them vote to leave, 33 of them vote to stay, and 10 vote to abstain. Under normal circumstances, and the sort of default position in Robert's Rules of Order, is that those 10 abstentions are just voting present, or they're declaring their presence but not actually choosing to vote. And so we would take the 67 who voted yes and the 33 who voted no, we would compare them, and we would have 2/3 the motion would carry. The problem is the language in the discipline does not say those who are present and voting. The language in the discipline says those who are present, members who are present. So the way this is going to work on the 19th is if you show up to the meeting after church, you are going to be asked to sign the membership list next to your name, verifying that you are a member and that you are present. And when you sign that paper, we are going to give you a ballot. And that is the ballot you are going to use to vote. It's going to be a secret ballot. You don't have to put your name on it. One quirk is that if you're under 18, but you are a full member of the church, meaning you've gone through confirmation and joined the church formally, you are allowed to vote, but you have to mark that you're under 18 at the time of the vote. That's for legal purposes. They're anticipating the possibility of legal challenges, and some places have different laws about that sort of thing, so they don't want to have to reverse engineer the vote. That would be a pain. So I know our teenagers aren't here, but I've already talked about this with my boys because they're both members but under 18. So if they want to vote, they're going to have to mark under 18. But other than that, there's no indication of who you are on the ballot anywhere. You just vote yes, no, or abstain. So we are going to count those ballots, and the number of ballots turned in with either yes, no, or abstain marked on them will be compared to the number of people who sign in at the beginning of the meeting, and those numbers have to match. So if you sign in as a member present, you have to turn in a ballot, or the vote will be invalid. Does that make sense? Now the reason for that is because, take the same scenario. 67 vote for, 33 vote against, and 10 abstain. Well, now we've only reached, if you do that math, it's 67 out of 110, not 67 out of 100 who voted. And in that case, we would fall 5 to 6% short of the need, and the motion would fail. Yeah. So the abstentions are technically a recognition of not voting, but they function as a no vote. You follow me? So if you were to abstain, it has the same effect, even though you technically abstain, it would have the same effect on the results of the vote as if you had voted no. So here's my challenge. This is in my letter that will be coming out this week, but it's my challenge to all of you who are thinking about coming. I want to challenge you to make a choice. Even if you're not sure, even if you don't want to offend someone, even if you really aren't strongly convicted one way or the other, if you come in and you sign in and you get a ballot, I really invite you to vote yes or no. It might be very tempting to vote abstain, and I get that. I get it. Many of you have come to me and said, I don't really have a horse in this race. I don't really feel strongly one way or the other. I just love my church and I want to be here. I've heard that sentiment from a lot of people. That may be the case, and I appreciate that, and I love you for it. But abstention is not the same as a non-vote. It essentially has the effect of a no vote. So if you're going to abstain, vote no. I honestly, this is from my heart, I honestly don't. I have my opinions about where I think would be best, but I'm not going to push those on you. That's not my place. My place is to care for you as my flock and to love on you no matter what your decision is. Whether you want to stay, whether you want to go, whether you're in the majority, the minority, I don't care. You're sheep in my flock. You have been entrusted to me by the Lord, and I want to love on you and care for you no matter what. That's me. Now, I have opinions. I'm human, right? I have opinions, but this is your church. Correction, this is the Lord's church, but you guys are empowered with discerning its future. You as the members of this church are a part of discerning this, right? You are to walk with the Lord and decide how you need to vote on your conscience. Because, and many of you have come up to me in the last several months and wanted to know how the church's vote will impact me. I don't know. I'm not certain how it will impact me because I don't know how you're going to vote. And I don't know what the future holds. None of us do, right? All I know is that this church, God willing, and the creek don't rise, will be a church long after I'm its pastor. And that's all I care about. So you guys need to make this choice for yourselves. And I would encourage you that the important thing is to make a choice. Seek the Lord, be in prayer, talk with others, come to these meetings, read my letters, come to some conclusion about where you think the church belongs, and cast your ballot, yes or no. Now, I'm still going to love you if you abstain. We have 100 abstentions, whatever. I don't care. But the point is, I really want to encourage you. I know it's very tempting to just say, I'm going to abstain because I don't want to make a choice. I don't like that we're making this choice. Maybe that's you. I don't like that we're presented with this. Why do we have to do this? But regardless, follow what you believe the Lord is leading you to and vote. Okay? I don't care what it is. But just know that an abstention will mean essentially the same as a no vote. And we have to reach that 2/3 present in order to pass. Now, I mentioned the check-in process for people who are in person. There's something a little bit different for those who might log in on Zoom. So those online and those who maybe are expecting to be out of town and want to still participate, there will be a Zoom meeting. You can log into the Zoom meeting. How many of you have been on Zoom before? It's the pandemic. We've all been on Zoom, right? So it's not necessarily a total mystery to you, But the way we vote on Zoom, because the ballots are secret, right? We're having secret ballots, but it's hard to have a secret ballot. You can't just like put your vote in the chat, right? Because then everybody sees it. So the way that we're going to vote is that if you're online, there will be a designated vote counter that will be logged into the Zoom meeting. So one of the people on the Zoom meeting will be the official designated vote counter. And you will, if you're on Zoom, you will direct message them. You can message only a private message to that account in Zoom. You'll private message your name and your vote, yes, no, or abstention, to that account, and that account will be viewed by the person collecting those votes and the district superintendent, and the two of them will certify the vote. Now, to make sure you are who you say you are, the conference is requiring that, because they can't physically sign the form when you get there, the conference is requiring that 2 people who are present sign next to your name on the member list, vouching that you are who you say you are, right? So if Mickey signs in to the Zoom meeting, 2 of you who are present would have to say, yep, that's Mickey, sign next to Mickey's name on the member list. That's 2 members of the present congregation vouching that a person online is in fact who they say they are, and look on the member list, yes, they are in fact a member, they're eligible to vote. Make sense? All of this will be covered in my letter, and like I said, we're also going to do a dry run for anybody who thinks they may have to use Zoom. We're going to do a meeting beforehand to talk everybody through this, to answer your questions, because one of the things they're clear about in the procedures we got is that technical difficulties and inability to operate the technology is not going to prevent them from moving forward with the vote. So hear me now. If you can be here present, if you can be present here physically for the vote, and it's important to you, be here in person. That's the only way to guarantee that your vote will be heard. We are doing everything we can to make sure the technology works, but I keep getting notices even this morning that our internet is slow. They're not going to take my internet was slow, my dog ate my homework, I can't find my mouse. That's not going to be an option, okay? So if your internet goes out, if you're sunbathing in Aruba somewhere and you're logging into the meeting, I hope you don't do that. But if that's you, and your internet goes out on the sandy beaches of Aruba, then you won't get to vote. Problem, we've had this trouble this week. If the internet here goes down, it's not going to prevent us from moving forward with the vote. It's going to happen on the 19th regardless. So like I said, if you really can't, if you can't make it, Zoom is your best second option and your only other option. But if you can be here in person, I would encourage you to be here in person if it's important to you to vote. Yes, Karen. Who has no camera? That is a great question. That is a great question. So Karen's asking, what about people who log in on Zoom but don't have cameras? So one convention about a couple of things. First of all, one convention about Zoom is that often there is a call-in feature where you can just call in rather than log in through the internet. That is not going to be an option because you have no way to chat. So you'd have to be logged in on a computer or a tablet or a phone or something so that you can private message your vote in. Exactly, yeah. So more to the direct question that you asked, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they're requiring. I will look into that, and I'll address it in my letter, but I don't know as though they mention whether they require a camera or not. Yeah, Vicki. So that is not, so her question is if the vote decides we're gonna move toward disaffiliation, is there a secondary vote? Do we go independent or do we join the GMC or some other denomination? That's going to be something, originally I was thinking we were going to do that immediately following the vote if we decide to disaffiliate. But I feel like there's enough question that it's worth putting that to our administrative council and our strategic planning team who've been working on this issue for a long time to come up with some recommendations, and we would likely have a meeting The nice thing about that is we don't have to have the district superintendent involved in that, because that's a decision for us afterwards. So we have to have a district superintendent preside over this meeting. So we will likely have an additional time. We may do some listening sessions. We may do some research and present some options, whatever those look like. But my intention now is if we decide to disaffiliate, to kick that to our administrative council and strategic planning team to do some research and to come back with recommendations for the conference or for the church at a later time. That also brings up another thing that's not necessarily in their procedures, but we have heard through conversations with the cabinet members that the practice has been immediately following the vote, if we were to vote to disaffiliate on the 19th, immediately following the vote, the district superintendent would invite those who voted against the motion to gather to process next steps for them. Many of you on the straw poll indicated that you'd prefer to stay, but if the church leaves, this is your church. Many of you expressed that, and many the other way too, just by the way. So just because you voted no doesn't mean we're locking the door and taking your keys. Not that that would help, because there's so many different versions of the keys out there anyway. I think if you have been a member of the Brighton community longer than 20 years, you probably have keys to this building, I think. But or they might be old now, but you probably do. Anyway, that's a little joke. The truth is, just because the vote doesn't go the way you prefer doesn't mean we're kicking you out. No one will know, quite frankly, unless you tell them. No one will know, because the vote will be a secret ballot. So you would have to self-identify as someone who voted against the motion to disaffiliate, and if you chose, you could meet with the district superintendent, and they could come alongside. And that's one of those places they would get a sense for, is there a groundswell of support for a new church start? Is it really more that people are going to find other Methodist churches or find other places to worship, whatever that might look like? That's really kind of they take the vote total and the feedback from that sort of meet and greet afterwards. So just be prepared for that as a possibility. Yes, Rick?
Will the results of the vote be distributed right after we're done voting?
Yes.
Or is there going to be a period of time again, another week, or what?
No. So we will know the results of the vote before the meeting is closed. Yeah. The votes will be tallied by the district superintendent and our designated vote counter. And we haven't settled on exactly who that is yet. I've got some ideas, but we'll have an official person designated to count that vote with the DS. And once they come to an agreement, the vote will be announced. And then we'll have to then certify that vote, sort of like Congress. I don't know why we do things like this, but we do. We'd have to certify that vote in writing to the leaders of the annual conference. Independent. The district superintendent will obviously relay the news of how the vote goes, but we would have to formalize that by filing it officially with the conference. Yes? Great question. Kay asks, if we do vote to disaffiliate, when would it be finalized? So the short answer is the end of June-ish. So there's several steps that go along after that. If we vote to disaffiliate, then we enter into the next stage of the process, which is we report assets and tax valuation for our building. So we'll tell them what the county says we're worth. And we submit an inventory of our assets. We submit financials. We've already submitted some of our financials, but we submit more financials and various other documentation. We would give them an opportunity to come in and take photocopies of all of our physical records. If you're a nerd like me, you've been in the physical records. We actually have membership records in paper going back to the early 20th century, which is pretty cool. So they can come in for history and archives. They want to photocopy all that for their records. And then we would be assessed. Well, we'd enter into the negotiation with the trustees of the conference, and they would tell us what they think we should owe them over and above what's the minimum, the 113. And we could come back at them if we felt like that was unfair and offer a counter offer, and they have all the power to reject or accept it. We're not out of options entirely, but we would have to engage legal counsel at that point if we couldn't come to an agreement. But we have to reach that agreement by, I can't remember the date, but it's mid-April. And as long as we come to an agreement by mid-April on a final cost, then we have until June to pay that final cost. And then in June, the annual conference, so long as we've paid our cost, the annual conference will consider the petition to finalize the disaffiliation of the church. And those votes have gone, not unanimous, but they've been sort of a rubber stamp, a prayerful acknowledgement, basically is what they do. But they do have to take a formal vote at annual conference in June. And then once that happens, the trustees go through the process of formally transferring deeds of trust, etc., to the new entity that we set up. A lot of weeds there, but essentially the short answer is late June, early July. We would be independent of the United Methodist Church. And then it would be what's the next step. And we wouldn't wait to then to dig into that question, but we couldn't move on anything until then. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, Vicki. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Vicki is asking, if the church votes to go, am I free to go with you, or do I have to stay? The answer is that's entirely up to me. Yep. Yep. So the way it works for pastors is I can choose to change my association with the denomination at any point. I get a vote, and that's it. Well, my wife gets a vote too, but you know, we don't have to vote or anything about it. So that's just up to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Lavita's asking, if you already know how you want to vote, do you have to come and sit through the meeting? Or can you just sign in, grab your ballot, submit it, and vote it? The problem with something like that is that you never know what can happen in a meeting. And not that I would expect speeches for and against such a motion would necessarily sway people a great deal. Once they get to that point, we've had town hall meetings, we've had lots of private conversations with folks. You guys have been chewing on this for some time. I suspect that most people are going to show up knowing how they're going to vote. Maybe not everybody, but somebody. Most people will, I think. But the problem is you never know how it's going to unfold and what might come of it. And so part of the problem is until the district superintendent opens the vote and asks you to cast your ballot, there's no place to turn it in. There's no process to turn it in. And you can't turn it in before because that invalidates the vote. So that's in the Robert's Rules of Order weeds, but yeah, the long and short of it is you'd need to stick around for the meeting. At least long enough for the district superintendent to call for the vote if you needed to leave after that.
Will he be here or on Zoom again?
He will be here physically. In fact, the annual conference is requiring the district superintendents to be physically present for these. Yeah, so he will be here. He has said, at least tentatively, that he plans to join us for worship that morning, and I will introduce him. He's been here once before, but didn't introduce himself and didn't make himself known, but he just came to worship. But I will introduce him so people know who he is, and so he is planning to be here for worship and will be here in person for our vote. Yes, Bonnie. Mm-hmm. No. So Bonnie's question is, if we decide on the 19th that we're going to disaffiliate, we go through the process and leave, and join the GMC or some other denomination, do we have to leave the building? No. This process is intended to offer us a way to take our building and assets with us to wherever we end up. Does that make sense? We keep the building. Yes. If we vote to disaffiliate and we go through that process, we are leaving with our building and assets. If the vote on the 19th falls short of the 2/3 required, then we would have to leave the building in order to leave the denomination. But if we vote to disaffiliate, then we would take all of our assets with us. We would basically change the names on the doors and the sign out front and the letterhead and the website, and we'd be off and running. Any other questions? I couldn't possibly have been that clear, I promise you. Especially given my state of mind. Yes, Les? So I apologize to those online. We didn't have a microphone ready for Les to share, and that's probably too much for me to summarize, but his imploring us to take this decision seriously is well heard by all. It's important stuff. It's probably the most consequential decision that this congregation has made since Karen's father was the pastor here and you moved to this place. And it might even be the most consequential decision this church ever makes. It will set the tone for what the future looks like. Whatever you desire that tone to be, that's the question we're asking. That's really the question we're asking. Where is it you feel that we are going to be best positioned to serve God and this community? And that's really the question before you. So, yeah, I would echo the take it seriously, and vote your conscience, vote your prayers. Pray this out with the Lord, and if you come to a different conclusion than the person you sit next to every day here in church, so be it. That's part of the process. As I mentioned in many cases, I'm a bit of a nerd. I don't know if you noticed that, but some of you are laughing. Is it that obvious? But I happen to be very well versed in Robert's Rules of Order. I was the 15-year-old kid who volunteered to be a parliamentarian for a legislative committee session at annual conference. That's just how sick your pastor is. Just so you know, I am. Another life, I could have been a lawyer. But the point is that I know how to run meetings and I know how to work decisions through a voting process. And I will be the first to tell you that I hate voting. I absolutely, in a situation like this, making decisions as a group, I hate voting. It is the absolute worst way to make a decision as a group, except for all the other ways. It's just the truth, right? We are left with this is our only way to make this decision with any integrity, and it doesn't work unless you bring your opinion. So don't think, I know where the church is going, I'm not going to bother showing up. I want to hear your voice. God wants you to speak your voice. Even if you don't stand and give a speech at the session, make your vote heard. Contribute to the life of this church. Part of discernment is the ear can't tell the eye, we have no need of you, right? I always get that wrong, but you get the idea, right? The pinky toe can't tell the hand, I have no need of you, right? Whatever, you fill in the blank. Whatever you feel you are of the body of Christ, you are important. And your voice and your vote are important to us voting and discerning the will of God with integrity. So I want you there. I want you there. And I want... Yeah. Yeah. So Vicki asks, will there be speeches? Yes. As I spoke to the district superintendent, the way it'll work is, and I haven't told her this, but I'm going to be asking Mickey to be the presenter of the motion as the leader of our administrative council and the point person for this process with the conference. It'll be presented, the language that we spoke about here. Then the district superintendent will open it up for questions and answers. Hopefully you will have received a lot of your answers already, but if you don't want to take my word for it, that would be an opportunity. You could ask the district superintendent. I would invite you, and I say this in my letter too, but I would invite you, if you know you have a question before the meeting, to make it known. Email it to me, shoot it off to Mickey, send it through carrier pigeons so no one knows it was you who asked. We will find a way to answer it so that all might be able to know the answer. But one of the things about, and I've done enough of these to know, questions will come up and we won't know the answer.